Welcome back, friends. Today we are going to talk about Alzheimer's disease and diseases that we lose our loved one little bit by bit over time and the grief that comes with that. So, welcome back, friends. And like I said, we are going to be talking about most, like, more, we're going to focus on Alzheimer's. However, sometimes when people are diagnosed with a illness or disease, you can see them kind of deteriorate in front of your eyes over time, and this can sometimes take years. And so I know for me with my dad, this was more physically noticeable. With cancer, he lived with it for over 10 years. And so over time, little things that he used to be able to do, he no longer could do. And I know like he was frustrated with that. And some of it also is aging, right? Because he was in his 70s. And so he was a rancher his whole life. And so I remember him being frustrated when he used to be able to throw hay bales like 30 feet above his head into a barn, like a barn loft, which is ridiculous. I don't know if you've ever lifted hay bales, like the smaller, like the square bales, but they're heavy. And I don't know how much exactly they weigh, but probably 50 to 75 pounds. I don't know. That's just my guess. But you hold up, you pick them up by these little pieces of twine and you chuck them up into this barn loft. And then now we had like a conveyor belt and stuff that we would use. But my dad, they used to never have that. And so he would have to throw them up there. And he would kind of use a pitchfork and like stab the little hay bale, the square bale, and then take it and like use it as a, what's that motion? Like a fulcrum, like, I don't know, you learn it like fifth grade. Like, throw it up over his head into this barn loft. And so, a few years after his cancer diagnosis, I don't think he was actively receiving chemo at that time, but he was taking medication that would help keep the cancer at bay. And so he was weaker, and so he couldn't throw that how he had used to be able to 40 plus years ago. And he was just devastated. And I remember thinking, like, my brother and I were both like, well, yeah, like, of course you can't throw that. Like, you're not 20 anymore. We can't even throw it now when we're in our 20s. But for him, it was really hard. It was a really hard moment. And I remember him just being like, he was devastated. Like he walked away and I think he was crying. And so when your loved one is losing these these things that they used to be able to do, it's devastating. And so I wanted to specifically focus on Alzheimer's because for my dad, it was physical. And especially in the final months, like physically, I could see him declining. He no longer could walk. He couldn't stand on his own. My brother had to like lift and pivot him places. And that was hard. That was really, really hard to see a man who had been so strong his whole life up to like a few months before that, just completely unable to stand. And that is something that affected me that I don't think I was anticipating it affecting me as much as it did. I had seen lots of people as a hospice nurse. I had seen them decline. I knew the progression of the disease. I understood it. But when you see it happening in front of you to your loved one, it is a grief that just shatters you. And I think that it makes it even harder is because you're expecting it, but you're not really expecting it. And specifically with Alzheimer's, um, it's just I'm just gonna use the word devastating so much in this episode because it's devastating. And for those of you that don't know, Alzheimer's is its own disease. It has stages of progression where the memory loss happens, and then it goes to the point where like physically you can't do things anymore. So it's its own disease. Now, comparing that with dementia, and so my grandpa had dementia, the past or the few years before he died, um, that is often paired with another diagnosis, and it has its characteristics are different based off of what other diagnosis they have. And so, specifically with Alzheimer's, it is a disease that slowly robs a person, or not so slowly, robs the person of their identity. So often, somebody who was the sweetest, gentlest, most caring person now is violent and lashes out and is angry and swears. Like, I know my aunt had Alzheimer's. That's what she passed away with. And she, in those last, I don't know, months, year, um, she was not the same person that she was. She didn't remember who we were. She didn't remember her children. And I I want to do an episode on Alzheimer's because for one, I had somebody reach out about Alzheimer's stuff, but I really truly believe if my mom hadn't died tragically the way she did, I think that she would have had Alzheimer's because a lot of her aunts had it. Um, I know that now there is more studies coming out that really it's our diet and our lifestyle that affects Alzheimer's, but I also believe that it is hereditary and there's some because I've had so many people that have passed away from it. And so I don't think it's just a coincidence that they were eating the same things because some of them were in different areas. And so again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert on the science of that. So just take that as you will. But it has ran in my family per se. And so Alzheimer's is something that is near and dear to my heart. It is a very tragic disease. Their memories go away and they no longer can do just basic functions. And then they start to forget the people that they've known their whole lives. And for those of us around them, that's the hard part. That's the part that when you slowly see this person becoming less and less of themselves, but they're still alive and you're still trying to support them, you still visit them, you take on the hardship of it. And so I think the difference with my dad, he could see what we were going through. Mentally, he was always there up to like just a few hours before he died. Like he was still very with it. And he knew how hard it was on us. And so he was trying not to make it harder, if that makes sense. He was trying not to vocalize his pain, even though we knew he was in pain. We knew he was hiding it. We knew he wasn't talking about it. Like he tried to hide it. With Alzheimer's, it's the exact opposite. They don't know. They don't have any idea um, that you're even their their child or their spouse or their loved one. So they don't know to just fake things, right? They lose that ability to do that. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this because this is something that people don't understand unless they've gone through it, that is, it is a different type of grief as well. It is something that feels very lonely. It is something that you you don't have a lot of other people to talk through it, right? Because I think a lot of people get confused Alzheimer's with dementia, and so you're like, oh yeah, like my grandma was confused near the end. You just got to do this, and this is different. It feels personal, even though we know it's not personal. We know that they're not forgetting us on purpose, but there is such a deep sadness and pain that comes with that that is undescribable. And so if you have a loved one that is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I just want to give you the acknowledgement that you deserve of how horribly hard this disease is, how horribly devastating and complex this disease is. And it goes on for years, sometimes more than a decade. And that in itself is just such a heavy burden because you want your loved one to be at peace. You don't want them to go through this. You don't want to have to go through this. You don't want to wish them dead, but you wish that their suffering was no longer. And very unselfishly, you wish that your suffering was no longer. And so that's what I want to acknowledge in this podcast is that it's not selfish to have those thoughts. That is completely normal to wish that this was just done, to wish that you could actually grieve with the grief that people will acknowledge. Because, like I said earlier, like most people don't understand that this goes on forever. And so it is a grief that you're carrying around, but you don't get days off of work. You don't People don't understand if you break down crying in the grocery store because you see somebody your mom's age that reminds you so much of her, and she can't go grocery shopping anymore when she should be able to. And so again, I want to acknowledge that it's okay to feel that way, to have thoughts about that. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't mean that you wish they were dead because you don't. This is just pain that is so intense and so hard that you want it to be over. And that is a completely normal and human response. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And I also want to give you a few pointers, a few tips on supporting yourself and getting through this. And so, um, I talk a lot about feelings on here, and I will always talk about feelings because we so often want to hide from our feelings. We want to push them away. And this is one of those things that, like, when you look at your life and you have somebody with Alzheimer's that is close to you, that you love, that you want to be there for, you see that this might go on for a long time. And so your natural response is to just push those feelings aside, to shove it down, because you know that, or you think that if you allow that to come up, like, you're never going to survive the next few years. And so I want to tell you that that's not true. I want to encourage you and invite you to allow those emotions as they come up. I want to give you permission to call into work sick. If if today is the first day that your dad can't remember your name and has no clue who you are, that hits hard. So I want to give you permission to call in sick to work that day. Maybe it is the 500th time or 500th day they don't remember you, but it's coming up on the holidays. And it's especially just hitting really hard this year because you look at them and you're like, this might be one of my last holidays with them, but they don't even know who I am. And so, again, I just invite you to say no to things. I invite you to say no to work. I invite you to say no to holiday celebrations. I invite you to say no. And no is a complete sentence. You don't have to give people details. You don't have to tell them why. And I want to empower people more to just say no to things. We tend to want to have to justify because we feel guilty. And I hope that this podcast leaves you with less guilt surrounding these things, because Alzheimer's oftentimes is a long road, and you need your strength to get through it. And so that includes mentally and emotionally, that you need that strength. And so saying no to things that you know will suck your energy, saying no to maybe parties where you're going to show up and you know nobody's even going to mention your loved one because to them it's just another day. And like, well, they haven't died, so like they don't remember, right? And so that's hard. It's hard when nobody asks. It's hard when somebody does ask and you don't know what to say because you don't want to be the Debbie Downer at the party. You don't want to be the one to break out crying because you're like, no, this is way harder than I thought. And like, right, you're like, well, this isn't the time and place. So I just want to acknowledge that it's okay to say no. I also want to acknowledge that it is okay to show up, but have a plan of when you want to leave. It's also okay to have a plan of what are a few phrases or things you're going to say when people ask about your loved one. I also want to give you permission that it's okay to go and see your loved one who has Alzheimer's like on a different day. It's also okay to go on that day, right? If it is coming up on um let's say, I know Thanksgiving will be before this podcast airs, but it's okay to not have to go on Thanksgiving. Maybe you want to go the next day and just bring them a piece of pie if they're still able to eat regular foods. And then that can be your celebration. And so I want to give you permission to think outside the box and to not feel selfish. And I also want to invite you to join. I'm going to have a webinar. Um, I'm going to run it all through December, but when this podcast airs, if you're listening to it, I'm going to have one November 30th at 1 p.m. Central Time. And then I'm going to run it the next few weeks after that. And it's 3 tips to get through the holidays with grief. And so I really encourage you to join in. It is a free webinar. You can go to nursegriefcoaching.com to register for that. And then, like, if you miss the one on November 30th, I will be having it weekly. And so then you'll get notifications of the next time I'm running it. And so I really encourage you to come and get some tools for this holiday season to be able to handle the holidays, right? Because they're not fun when you have a loved one who has Alzheimer's. They're just not. And so I hope you'll join me at nursegriefcoaching.com. And then always, there on my site, there is to book a free call with me. I encourage you to come and talk to me and we can talk through like your specific pain because again, this is my experience with Alzheimer's, but I know everybody has individual grief. I know that it comes up, different things trigger different people. I know also, like, for me, I have 6 children. For the person who is also caring for maybe an aging spouse or another aging parent, that could be hard as well. And so I want to hear about your individual struggles that you're going through, and so I can help you through that. So nursegriefcoaching.com. And I'm praying for you guys, and I hope that you have the very best possible day that you can.